Hello, people. Andrew here, talking about comics from a reader, collector, speculator, investor point of view, in that order of importance to myself. And today I'm continuing on with the Avengers, part two of the Bronze Age. There's no definite line between gold, silver, bronze, copper, and then whatever else. It's sort of just morphed into this thing through a collective agreement that's not written down anywhere. So, to make it easier for myself and for doing these things, I'm going to call the Bronze Age the books from basically from the late 1969 when it changed to 15 cents a copy all the way up till the end of 1979, and then we'll move into the Copper Age. I know that some people think the Bronze Age goes on beyond that, and some people think it ends earlier than that, but I'm going with that. And so this is the second part of the Bronze Age, and I'm running it just a little bit into what I would consider the Copper because I'm running it from issue 152 to issue number 200, which is October 76 all the way to October of 1980. Okay, so what's it all about? Well, it's obviously about the Avengers. It's the whole story where a group of heroes gets together, bands together to fight the menace that no single hero can defeat. And that's always been the premise of the Avengers, and it continues. I I'll break it down a little bit because there was a lot of different creatives working on this particular 50 issue run of Avengers. You had writers, there were Jerry Conway, Jim Shooter, David Michelini, Mark Gruenwald, Stephen Grant, Steve Gerber, Marv Wolfman. They all had something to do with this particular run. And the same thing is said about the artists itself. Sal Buscema or Bashima. You had George Perez, John Byrne, Arvell Jones, doesn't mean much to me. Carmen Infantino, George Tuska. So there was a number of different artists that worked on this as well. As far as a story, it's a collection of different stories. It uses a lot of older villains and some new villains and older characters. A great cast of so many of the Marvel heroes of the time, but also some new characters as well, some new heroes as well. And then some of the covers were produced, especially these early ones, anyways, by Jack Kirby. So a great, from a collector's point of view, it's worth it for this particular series from issue 152 to 200 because there are so many aspects within this run that are collecting worthy or collectible. So let's try and break it down just a little bit, sort of bit by bit, piece by piece. So here we are with issue number 152. As I say, starts in October of 1976, Kirby cover. This is the resurrection of Wonder Man. Wonder Man first showed up again in issue number 151. He had been missing died in issue number 9 of Avengers, and nobody had ever heard of him since. He makes one appearance as the lethal Unliving Legion in issue about 131 or something like that. But this is the resurrection of Wonder Man. And Jerry Conway, who wrote this particular series, I will say something about Jerry Conway. I'm not going to give a bio of everybody, but Jerry Conway started writing comic books when he was 16 years old. And by the age of 19, he was writing The Amazing Spider-Man. So he's partially responsible for the death of Gwen Stacy storyline and for creating The Punisher. He was also working on Werewolf by Night, Tomb of Dracula, and in the creation of Man-Thing. He then went over to DC at some point in time, and the one work I'm familiar with the most for him is Firestorm, which I've done a couple of videos on, because I liked what I saw from Jerry Conway in the Firestorm. And beyond the comics, he went into screenwriting and then script writing and producing TV shows. So the man has some chops. And here he is writing about 6 or 7 issues of the Avengers during this particular run. So what's happening here is he starts off with the resurrection of Wonder Man, and it begins a plot that sort of carries over for a number of years. And this plot involves Simon Williams, who is Wonder Man, the Vision, and Scarlet Witch. See, when Vision was created, his mind was created using brain patterns of the dead Simon Williams. So when Vision at this point has sort of reconciled and said, yes, I have humanity, I'm a human. When Wonder Man comes back, he starts to question, am I really, an individual, or am I just a synthesized clone of Simon Williams? So he gets a little colder and a little more distant, which puts friction between him and Scarlet Witch. And you'll say this for Simon Williams, because he is got him and Vision have the same similar brain patterns. I can see why somebody would say, well, then Simon Williams will then be attracted to Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch. And there may be a like return because there's a similarity between Simon Williams and the way he thinks and acts and does things in the same way that the Vision does. So this storyline, this sort of weird little triangle thing goes on for a number of years. It's not, prevalent in every story, but it crops up again from time to time. But they're not finished with Simon Williams as far as plot lines are concerned either. He's developing his own character. One of the things is that he keeps like to run around and tell everybody that he's as the second only in Thor to power, and yet he becomes afraid of going into battle because he says, I've experienced death and I don't want to do it again. I'm not so sure this superhero life is something that I want to do. And again, that crops up, and he has to resolve that throughout this particular run. And I think he pretty much does through this particular run. So it was a good story here. The stuff that Jerry Conway wrote was good. It was a good, fun adventure story. You've got the whole Black Talon resurrecting the Wonder Man. You've got characterization that's happening there. I like how the characters throughout the entire series are developed, but I also like the way that they develop as working within and with the other characters, because there's a lot of them that are introduced. Wonder Man develops a strong friendship with the Beast, and there's other characters that show up. Ms. Marvel has a connection with Captain America, even though Wonder Man is trying to make a connection there himself. So there's character development and character interaction, which I really like, and I think they did all of them. Did a good job of illustrating that and developing that. So this is where we begin with issue number 152. And one of the Jerry Conway stories, it's a rather involved, well, not involved. I mean, it's Atuma wants to take over the world again. When doesn't he want to take over the world? But we get to see, the Atlantean Atuma in action again. This will involve the Submariner. This will involve Doctor Doom. So you get a lot of these old school villains coming back to take over the world. They do that a lot. But it's a good story, and it's a good action-adventure story involving the Avengers. And most of this particular run is illustrated with Kirby covers. This is issue number 154. And it introduces a new character by the name of Tyrak. So he's a villain, and he works for Atuma. He's like Atuma's right-hand man. Is there anything amazing about Tyrak? No. He's just a very, very powerful, strong Atlantean. He's, again, in Thor level of power type of thing. I like the fact that there's now at least a second type of villain that you get. You don't always have to go to Atuma. You can go to this Tyrak guy, and at some point in time, somebody could develop Tyrak into a different personality and a different character with different reasons. This is his first appearance, so keep that in mind for speculation reasons. So it was a storyline that involved, as I said, Tyrak and Atuma and all of these other characters as well. This is the first appearance of a character named Graviton, because we go into that sort of series. Again, Graviton's a new villain, and the idea behind Graviton, and again, he wants to take over the world, but he has different motivations. I mean, Atuma just hates everybody on the surface, but what happens with Graviton is he's just a guy working in a science lab, and the accident that gives him these gravity powers, and he's tired of being looked over, passed over for promotions or for people not paying attention to him, the ladies not having an interest in him. So when he gets these powers, he says, you know what, I'm going to rule the world, and then everybody will be bending their knee to me. And that's why he wants to rule the world. It's not because he has any grand plans, just that he's tired of being the little guy and wants to be the big guy. So this is Graviton's first appearance. And I like Graviton, although I will say this about the storyline itself. When it does resolve, they send pretty much, your spoiler here, Graviton off into a prison that they sort of make. And I don't know if they thought about this, but if Graviton cannot escape the prison that they've created for him within 2 minutes, 3 minutes, he'll die. So, and nobody sort of gives that a second thought. They just, this is Graviton, and they encase him in a stone coffin type of thing, dump him into the ocean. It's like, well, if he doesn't get out of that, how he's going to die, because he's going to suffocate and die. And none of the Avengers take note of this, or even, whatever. And of course, Graviton does somehow succeed and get out of there at some point in time. I'm pretty sure I've seen Graviton show up again in other books. But it just struck me as funny that, nobody made any notice of that. So, but it was a good story. I liked it. I liked it. I liked the fact that the guy had different motivations, and he was pretty powerful, and they did have to come up with some clever ways to defeat him. So here we go. This is a George Perez cover, I believe, and I really like this cover where everybody's just coated in these ants. It's like death by 1,000 paper guts. You can imagine if you had all these. I mean, it was a torture, right? Where the ants crawled over your head when you were buried up to your head in the sand. Well, I don't know anybody that's actually had experienced that, but I know that this was an old school torture from many, many years back type of thing, and this is, the ants would, bite, 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 bite. So yeah, I can see the pain in Wanda's face from this. They're hating these ants. I bring this cover up because, number one, I like the cover, but this is also the beginning, or the first signs, maybe not even the first signs, but definite signs that Hank Pym is mentally unstable. Now, he's being manipulated by Ultron, but nonetheless, the fact that Ultron could easily manipulate him it shows the fragility of his mind, and that comes into play again later on in later issues of the Avengers. So this is a first sort of real look at Ant-Man's mind, sort of being the fragility of it. I also really like the cover, and this is again another villain that an old school villain that I like to see. I mean, you got Ultron showing up. I always like Ultron. I think he's one of the better villains for the Avengers. Always recreating himself, making himself a better version of this, and his story again. He's not here necessarily to take over the world. That will be eventually. His idea is that he wants to create a mate, and with the mate, take over the world. First kill Hank Pym once he gets his mate, which is going to be based on Janet Van Dyne's brain patterns and life essence. And then he'll kill Hank Pym, and then the rest of the world. So this issue here, issue number 162, is the first appearance of Jocasta, which is to be Ultron's mate, and is infused with some of Janet Van Dyne's life force. Not enough to kill Janet Van Dyne, but enough to spark life within Jocasta. This, I think, is a good spec book as well, and I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end, but this is the first appearance of Jocasta. I like this story. Again, I like Ultron. I like the fact that he has different sort of motivations. Eventually wants to always take over the world, but, that's our AI overlords. They all want to do that. So, where are we now? 165. Okay, so this is... They go on to fight Count Nefaria, and he has his lethal legion that he puts back into effect, but they're just a stopgap because he wants to sort of weaken the Avengers before he takes them all on. This is the first issue 165 of Peter Gyrich, who is a government agent who has really tight restrictions against the Avengers, rescinds all of their access to government security and what have you. So the government starts to take a bigger role in the Avengers, starting with this and with Peter Gyrich. I just showed this one because I really like this cover. I think it's a dynamic pose and a dynamic cover of, Nefaria being, attacked by both Thor and Vision. I really like this cover. I miss the days in some of these covers that I've seen where the action on the inside is depicted on the outside. So I know that this is going to be a conflict that I'm going to read when I open up this book. A lot of covers these days, they're very posing. You'll get a pose of Nefaria, or more likely a pose of Thor, or with some of the variants, I'll get a pose of Spider-Man. Even though Spider-Man's got nothing to do with this book, it's Spider-Man month, so whatever. But I do like this cover. Then we begin the epic storyline that people still talk about and they recommend and whatever. It's the Korvac Saga, and this is pretty much written by George Perez. George Perez, I should say. It's illustrated by George Perez for the most part, but it's written by Jim Shooter. So the Korvac Saga, I don't want to give it away because it is a good saga to read. They said it's 10 issues, but there's a couple in there that kind of float around that aren't really part of it, and that's the Living Monolith type of thing. But Korvac, what's interesting about the Korvac Saga is that Korvac is a villain, and he's given, and there's some history, some origin, some lore about Korvac and his past and what he's done. And he has always been a villain, but he's changed his tune. He is villainous. There's no, it's just that he wants to remake the world in his image, and he wants to remake a better world. It's not like he wants to take over and be the Lord. I mean, there's that in the long run, but he wants to make it a better place for everybody, a more harmonized world. That's his vision. And I think that's where the problem comes in, is because he doesn't consider himself a villain. He thinks he's doing this for all the right reasons. But again, it's sort of like putting your foot down on a certain freedoms. You can't really, you're not free to choose. Even if it's the wrong choice, you should be given that freedom of choice. But, Korvac wants to create the world that he sees, and there's no room for a deviation from that world. It's going to be a more peaceful and harmonized world, and why wouldn't you want that, some would argue. But, the Avengers too, they're not totally aware that this is his grand plan. They still see Korvac as a villain because of his past deeds and his desire to take over the world. They don't know what's underlying his motivations this time around. The only one that eventually does kind of figure that out is Moondragon, and she's sad by the fact, but Moondragon's standoffish anyways, and she would sacrifice the freedoms of a world for a certain degree of harmony. Anyways, it was a good series. I do recommend that you read this particular series. And there's a lot of guest stars in here. You got the original Guardians of the Galaxy and George Perez artwork in here. Great stuff. This is issue 167. I'm just showing this. Just a couple of covers coming up. Ultron shows up again, and again, there's more Jocasta happening in these issues. But this is an interesting cover with Wanda and Ultron and all the shards. And I do like this Hawkeye cover as well. Hawkeye has some good covers, and this is one of those covers that I consider to be a really good cover. And this would be the final of the Korvac Saga, issue number 177. Yeah. So I'm not crazy about the cover. But it was a good story, and again, I do recommend reading the Korvac Saga. If there's anything at all that to be read in this, and I know that they've collected that in an omnibus or a trade or what have you, that this would be the one to read. But it's not the only one. This is issue number 181. This is the first appearance of Scott Lang. A good cover as well. All of the Avengers that are there, but it's the first appearance of Scott Lang, and that has some value. Oh, I just want to show these ones because, a friend asked me, he says, who's your favorite Marvel villain? He was expecting me to say something like Doctor Doom and Kingpin or something like that. And, the first thing that came to my mind was the Absorbing Man. Because because when I was younger, I think that was one of the first villains that really struck me as being, cool. Or he fought up against Thor in issue 236, and I thought he had a great set of powers. And I thought, he could be anything you wanted to. So I do like the Absorbing Man. I also like what they did with the Absorbing Man as far as the story is concerned, because he's not necessarily looking out to just always smash things and grab money. I mean, he wants to retire to a certain extent, and he wants to be left alone. And then he develops a story with Titania, and an interest again. He's just like, I can't work for a living anymore, so I just want to go somewhere where I can live in peace, but he's always hounded. So there were a couple of issues with the Absorbing Man, and because I like the Absorbing Man, here they are. This is the other story that I think that was a good story if you like the Absorbing Man. A story that has importance to the lore. It begins the story of the origin of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver up on Wundagore Mountain, and with Bova, the cow midwife, and what have you. But what's interesting about this series as well is that it's our first look at Chthon, and the understanding that the Darkhold was written by Chthon. And this is the first appearance of Chthon. It's also the first appearance of Magda, who happens to be Magneto's wife. And Modred shows up as here as well, and he's more powerful than he'd been led on to believe, at least initially. But I think that's because it's fueled by Chthon. This is when, and that was the first appearance of Chthon. Just sort of, not really. I mean, you see Wanda possessed by Chthon at the end of that particular series. This is the full story of her being possessed by Chthon and how they overcome this. I think it's just a 3-part series. It's a great little 3-part series. I think this one could have dealt with a 4th issue. Would have been nice. It had a good pacing all the way through for issues 1 and 2, and I think this one was maybe just a little bit rushed. I can see that the final being spread out over 2 issues as opposed to 1, but still, it is a good trio of stories. It's effective. It's got a role in the lore of the Marvel universe because of the Darkhold. So it's worth it for that. I'm just showing you this one because this is a rare situation where Daredevil actually shows up in Avengers book, because he's really not early days. I think he shows up a lot more now, or they even considered him as being a part of the new. Oh no, he declined the New Avengers, but he's really not Avenger type of thing. He doesn't have that kind of power level. So interesting to have him show up in an Avengers book. So he shows up in this one, and he shows up in this one. Obviously not quite so effective in this one. Look, he's turned to stone. Well, but nonetheless, it does have a couple of issues of Daredevil. All right, so this is where we start talking about the idea of cameos and first appearance, because this is the issue number 195, and it's the cameo of Taskmaster. And it's a full-page cameo at the back. I mean, he talks a little bit through it, and it's his school throughout here, but we actually see him, and he has some things to say on the final panel of this particular book. So it is his first appearance, but it's not his first full appearance. And so the question then becomes, what's the more valuable of the book? Is it his actual first appearance, or is it his first full appearance, where we get to see him in action and see what he's all about? This debate or discussion you go to the Wolverine issues between Hulk 180 and 181. Well, 180 is the actual first appearance of Wolverine, but 181 is your money book. It's because it's the first full use of Wolverine to see his talents and his abilities. Because they often did this in comic books, is that the end page of a particular story would flash a new character, so that you'd be enticed to say, who is that new character? And you would come back next month and buy that book to find out about the new character. So there were a number of cameos through it. So in the case of the Hulk book, for example, it's his first full appearance that has, the high dollar value, as opposed to the cameo. But then we take a look at some other books, and there's the Captain America, the first appearance of the Winter Soldier, who's just in like a glass case being frozen. And people, that's his first appearance. That's the money book. Is it? I mean, it's just a guy in a glass case. There's the same situation with Crossbones in Captain America, where there was this shadowy figure hiding in the bushes. Turned out to be Crossbones, but it's like, that's the first appearance of Crossbones. So which one has the value? I don't know. If I was given if I had to make a choice between 195 and 196 as to which book I would buy, personally, I would go with 196. Why? Because it is, sure, it's the first full appearance of Taskmaster as opposed to the actual first appearance, but it's got him on the cover as well. And this is a good cover. The other one isn't a bad cover, but it doesn't show him at all. This is a very good cover of Taskmaster. It's his first full appearance, so you get an idea of everything that he can do and what he's all about. I consider it a more important book than just the panel that showed what he looks like and his name. You know, some people are even going to the point where they look into books. Like, again, we'll talk about that Hulk 181, is that there are some comics that show the cover of that particular book as an ad for upcoming is the Hulk. So here's the ad for that book. Oh, maybe that's the first appearance of Wolverine. So those ones have gone up in value, type of thing. It's just an ad. So is this, you know, again, what do you consider a first appearance? I mean, I do consider 195 the first appearance, but this book I think is more important because it talks about who the Taskmaster is, and it's his first full cover appearance. I would go with this one. That's me. And finally, and I like the Taskmaster, and finally we get to issue number 200, which was a mistake. Sometimes Marvel will make, they'll tell a story, and after, time goes by and people consider it, and they think, what were you thinking on this one? And this is the 200th anniversary of Avengers. It should have been something a lot more special than this controversial issue. Why is it, considered controversial? It has to do with the fact that Ms. Marvel finds herself pregnant and goes to term within a couple of days and gives birth to a kid who later grows up. He's a descendant of Immortus, and basically he abducted Carol Danvers, did a little bit of mind twisting with her, so that he could make her his mate, his partner, and then impregnated her so that he could then be born on this earth. The only way that he could become a physical person on this earth was through this particular channel, and he chose Ms. Marvel as the carrier. It's got such a Rosemary's Baby feel about it that, it's villainous, but it's not. They don't even. There's a couple of characters within the Avengers that consider it villainous. Originally, Carol Danvers, very much so. She's very surprised when some of the others, especially Dan Van Dyne, you must be so happy you're having a kid. She says, no. She says, I'm not happy at all. This, I get that thing away from me, because she has no idea where it came from and what's it all about. So, it's not a happy little baby situation. And Hawkeye says, I don't trust this Marcus dude as far as I can spit. So I'm going to take him down. I don't trust anything about him. And he is. And he's also a descendant of Immortus, which is, one of the villains of the Avengers. So why they allow all of this to go on and Marcus to walk free and to take Carol Danvers with him, it comes back to bite them in the butt in the future issues when Ms. Marvel comes back and chastises them all, and the trust is severely broken. But at the end of this one, everybody walks away all happy. It was like, okay, so it's just wrong on so many levels, and it's the 200th anniversary issue of the Avengers. What are you going to do? So it's worth it to read it just for the controversy, but I don't like the issue. I don't think it's a good way to celebrate the 200th issue of Avengers, but there's nothing I can do about that now. Okay, so that's it. So reading it, I enjoyed reading this block of stories for the most part. I enjoyed the Korvac Saga. I enjoyed seeing some of the old villains come back, like Ultron. Always happy to see Ultron. The Jerry Conway story with Dr. Doom, Submariner, Atuma. That was a lot of fun, learning the history of Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, and involving the Darkhold and Chthon. Seeing the Absorbing Man come back for a couple of issues is always a lot of fun. Yeah, I enjoyed reading it, and I do recommend, for the most part, just to read this particular run. And I like the artwork. You had George Perez, you had John Byrne, etc., etc. As far as collectible is concerned, as I said right at the outset, that I think the whole thing is a good collectible because there are so many crossovers with so many different characters and creatives. Even at the beginning of the Korvac Saga, you have the original Guardians of the Galaxy, and you got Captain Marvel drawn by a Moondragon, and just there's a stream of characters and villains that populate this 50 issues. Speculation. Okay, so speculation, I would, you got the first appearance of Tyrak. Again, very minor villain, but it could become something. There's the first appearance of Henry Gyrich. I don't know if that one's so much a government. The first Graviton. Now we're getting into somebody that could be, turned into a solid villain. I think kind of, not quite the sleeper, but the one that's would be the first appearance of Jocasta. I think that more can be done with her, especially now in a sort of like in an AI world that we're moving into, that I can see Jocasta having a bigger part in the Marvel universe. So those would be more of the specs. When you start getting into investment, you get into the first appearance of Scott Lang because people have already noticed that one and brought up the price of that particular book. I don't think that's a strong book because it's just the first appearance of the character, but not the character as Ant-Man. That seems to have a little bit more effect on certain situations. He's not strong enough of a character on his own. For example, like the first appearance of Mary Jane Watson or the first appearance of Gwen Stacy might have some effect, but not the first appearance of, say, Scott Lang. So the one that's sort of blending into that sort of investment type of thing would be the Taskmaster. And again, I would personally, I like that one. I think that's one that people will want to add to their collection because it's got a stunning cover. And it is the first full appearance of the Taskmaster. Now, I know he went to the Marvel Universe, and they did a horrible job of representing this particular character. So the thought may be, well, his time has come and passed, so we'll pass by this particular book. But, Deadpool started off having no mouth in one of the early X-Men, and it was a terrible representation of Deadpool, and look where he is now. Once somebody got on board and said, hey, you know what, why are we mucking around with something that people already like and trying to change it into something different? Let's go back to what the people like and create that character. And look what happened. Now, Deadpool's got 3 movies. Everybody loves Deadpool, blah, blah, blah. So I can see if somebody says, you know what, let's do Taskmaster right. And if they did Taskmaster right, people would like it, and he could see some movement on his particular book. I still think it's a sharp-looking book, regardless, to add to your collection. I'm not going to get these things graded. Most of my collection is raw, and it'll probably stay that way. But if I was to consider any book at all in this particular run of 50 books that I would get graded and slabbed up, it would be this one. But as I say, I'm not going to do that. So overall, yep, it's worth a read. It's worth a collection. A couple of good spec books in there. And the cost is, some of the books, these ones here, this one, the Taskmaster, and probably the issue before this, they're going to be a few bucks. You can probably spend hundreds of dollars if you get this in a 9.8. But some of the other ones, like the Tyrak, the Jocasta, they're still, at a lower end. I don't think any of this stuff is necessarily going to be found in the dollar bin. It is all Bronze Age material. You might find some lower grade bronze in the dollar, but for the most part, you're going to be paying, depending on the condition, anywhere from $5 to $50 per book type of deal for this sort of thing. So that's what I got to say about the second half of the Bronze Age for the Avengers. Be good to yourself, and be good to others, and we'll talk again soon.